Morning. Mark, thank you, and thanks to the Kentucky Farm Bureau for your leadership, and it's great to see so many friends here. As Mark indicated, I want to recognize Tate Bennett. Tate is my agriculture legislative assistant. She's doing a great job. I am the new guy on the block. That's why I'm last, and I'm still trying to find my way around. I told a story last night about how after my first meeting in Congress, I walked into the broom closet by accident. There's a lot of those stories. I was on an elevator and I was trying to head to the floor to vote, and I noticed that I was not surrounded by members of the House of Representatives. These were unfamiliar people to me, and they looked at me kind of funny, and they knew I was out of place. These were U.S. senators. They said, "You're on the wrong elevator." So I'm still trying to find my way around the Capitol. I'm new to this place. But it doesn't take long to figure out that this place is very, very different than Kentucky. It's an honor to be here. It's a privilege to be here. It's an enormous responsibility to be here. But in just the first few days of being a member of Congress, I got a pretty strong lesson that Washington doesn't manage its finances the way that the people of Kentucky do. And it's a reminder of how important reform is of this place. Leader McConnell was talking earlier about the important work that he did with others on a bipartisan basis to make sure that we got some permanent death tax relief for family farmers and small business owners, and that was a true accomplishment. I agree. Regrettably, part of the deal was an increase in taxes that I don't think is necessarily appropriate. And the revenue that was generated as a result of the fiscal cliff deal was $620 billion, I think, over 10 years. So if you break that down on an annual basis, the tax revenue that we raised, or that the last Congress raised at the eve of the end of the last Congress, was about $62 billion for one single year. My first week in Congress, we debated the very important legislation to provide disaster relief assistance to the victims of Hurricane Sandy. Now, I agree that folks who have and experience disaster need assistance, need disaster relief. But it was a lesson to me that we don't pay for the spending, the emergency spending. You as farmers know disaster and risk management is an important part of being a farmer. We need federal assistance on occasion to deal with those kinds of things. We need a farm bill, for example, that has permanency, that provides stability to our risk management programs. We need a federal emergency management agency that is able to be there when a tornado hits, or when a drought hits, and you know all about droughts, or when, in the case of Hurricane Sandy, a terrible disaster hits the Northeast. The problem is that the politicians in Washington aren't paying for these important relief efforts. And when it was all said and done, after all the votes had been cast, and I voted for disaster assistance relief that was paid for, $17 billion in emergency assistance that was paid for. But at the end of the day, the Congress had spent $61 billion with no offsets, nothing. We're talking about $85 billion in cuts this week with sequestration, but $61 billion in 7 days spent and no way to pay for it. And we had just raised taxes $62 billion for the year. We had spent 100% of the revenue, after all the hand-wringing and the partisanship and the debate, almost 100% of the revenue that was generated by the fiscal cliff agreement was spent in 7 days. Now, this was a powerful lesson to me. And the lesson was this: that in Washington, raising taxes is a lousy deficit reduction strategy. Because every time the politicians up here raise taxes, they spend it. It's never dedicated to deficit reduction. And it's an excuse to not reform government. I want to talk about the important issues of agriculture, but since the topic here today is the national debt and our spending crisis, I do want to touch on this really briefly and my perspective on this issue, because I do think this is the dominant issue facing our country. I believe it's a national emergency. We're borrowing $3 billion every day. in this country. $3 billion every single day. We have a $16.6 trillion national debt. We are literally bankrupting our country. We've added $1 trillion to the national debt every single year for the last 4 years, at least $1 trillion. And Congressman Guthrie pointed out that in 30 years, with the entitlement crisis, that his daughter would be facing a future where 100% of the federal budget would be consumed by entitlement programs. It's actually worse than that, because it would only take us until 2025 when 100% of revenue will be consumed by Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and interest on the national debt, which leaves nothing for the Department of Agriculture. It leaves nothing for National Institutes of Health, nothing for national security or Homeland Security or TSA or the FAA or any of our discretionary priorities that Congressman Rogers was talking about. So our autopilot spending is literally crowding out all of the other priorities that we have as a country. And so we've got to fix this to put our country back on the right track. And it's not just about budgets, and it's not just about numbers, and not just about arithmetic. It's really about opportunity for the American people. It's about the American dream. It's about leaving to the next generation the same opportunities or greater opportunities than we've had. And this is the first time in American history where a majority of Americans believe that the next generation will have fewer opportunities than they've had. Now, farmers could teach the politicians in Washington this lesson, because what you do every day is you produce. You produce a bountiful supply of crops, and you raise something for the future, and you pass it on. And that's what we need to do as leaders in Washington. We need to be good stewards, like you're good stewards of your land. And we need to cultivate a future for our kids and our grandkids. So that's really what's driving me and my service in Washington, and I'm just privileged and honored to hopefully be a part of this and finally forcing the government to live within its means. But part of this is about growth also. We've got to get the economy back on track, and farmers and the agriculture sector can be a major part of that. Out of all of Kentucky's 6 districts, I have to brag about my own, Central and Eastern Kentucky a little bit, the 6th Congressional District. We are number 1 in the total value of horses sold, number 1 in the total value of livestock and poultry sold, number 4 in the total amount of tobacco sold, and number 2 in the total value of all agricultural products. Now, out of all 435 congressional districts in America, the 6th Congressional District of Kentucky is number 1 in the value of horse sales, number 27 in the value of sales of livestock and poultry, 8 in the highest value of tobacco sales, number 9 in the quantity of tobacco produced, and number 54 in the highest total value of all agricultural products sold. So we have a lot to be proud of in Kentucky's 6th Congressional District in terms of our productivity in the agriculture sector. But there's a lot of challenges. And I was very lucky as a freshman, and even though I can't find the broom closets from the elevators, I did get a chance to be appointed to the House Financial Services Committee. This is a great committee where we're going to be well positioned to be an advocate, not just for our community banks and our credit unions that serve customers in Central and Eastern Kentucky and all over the Commonwealth, but also for farmers. I'll never forget a visit that I made to a local community bank where he was talking about a long-standing relationship he had with a farmer. And he was talking about all of the new regulations and the onerous examinations arising out of Dodd-Frank and some of the other financial regulations that these community banks are facing. And what he said to me was, it used to be that in the business of banking, that we had a personal relationship with our farmers. And that personal relationship was built on trust and responsibility and accountability. And we go to church with these people, and we live in the community with these people. We know that they have collateral. We know that they have a credit-worthy history. But we no longer can make the business decision of whether or not to lend money to that farmer and to that family and to that small business owner. The government now makes that decision for us. And that is a sad commentary of where we are in this country. And it's what's holding us back. It's what's holding us back from economic recovery. And so On the Financial Services Committee, we're going to have a great opportunity to be an advocate for regulatory relief for our small community banks and our credit unions so that farmers can have access to the needed credit that they have to have in order to continue to produce and to be productive on the family farm. The estate tax relief that Leader McConnell was instrumental in implementing is so important, but I believe we can go further. I've co-sponsored legislation in this Congress to permanently repeal the death tax so that we never have this problem ever again. I've also introduced legislation, or about ready to introduce legislation, that would bring parity back to equine assets. Right now there's discriminatory treatment for equine assets where you have to have a 2-year holding period for equine assets in order to realize a capital gains rate as opposed to ordinary income. We're going to try to fix that in our tax reform package by promoting an equine parity tax act, and I'm going to be introducing that in the next few weeks. I have co-sponsored a very important piece of legislation that is a legacy of former Congressman Jeff Davis, the REINS Act. This is important to family farms. Right now, there's a whole lot of delegation of legislative responsibility from the Congress to the unelected regulators. And you experience this on your family farms with Clean Water Act issues and the EPA. What we need to do is carry forward the good work of Congressman Jeff Davis, and we need to enact the bill that I've co-sponsored, the REINS Act, regulations from the executive in need of scrutiny. And the principle is this: if a regulatory agency proposes or issues a rulemaking, a regulation, that would cost the American economy $100 million or more, then the Congress should take responsibility and accountability for that new law. And it should come back before the Congress, and it should be voted on yes or no. It does two things. Number one, it stops or makes more difficult to enact costly rules and regulations that hurt your family farms. But secondly, it restores the constitutional role of the legislative branch as the lawmaking branch. And it stops the Congress from over-delegating its lawmaking function to an unaccountable executive bureaucracy. And so we've got to pass that as well. There's a lot of other issues, the Farm Bill. On the Financial Services Committee, I have the opportunity to work with Chairman Lucas, who chairs the Agriculture Committee. I'll be weighing in with Chairman Lucas about permanency in the Farm Bill. I know the temporary nature of the Farm Bill is an aggravation. It's a signal of dysfunction in Washington. We need a long-term commitment to the Farm Bill, a 5-year Farm Bill that gives some stability to our risk management programs, that resolve some of the outstanding issues and controversies related to that, but gives farmers a level of certainty on risk management and crop insurance. And this is very important on the lending side as well, because as you know, if you're a young farmer, you can't get a loan unless you have stability in your crop insurance. And we need to fight for that for you all. And finally, let me just kind of conclude also with a note of optimism. There's a lot of challenges facing our country. Our debt crisis, our economy, which is still stagnant. We've got challenges in the ag sector, making sure life is easier for you all. But I want to mention something that Congressman Yarmouth pointed out, and I think is true, and I appreciate him recognizing this. There is a difference in the freshman class in Washington. We're reformers. Thomas is first among us in terms of trying to reform government. But I will have to say our class is a little different than most classes that come into Congress, because a lot of times congressional classes come in wave elections. So in 2010, you had a freshman class dominated by Republicans. In 2006, for example, the freshman class was dominated by Democrats. Our class is evenly balanced, as John Yarmouth pointed out. That has given us a unique opportunity. I have made friends with my Democratic colleagues on the other side, and we've talked about principles of agreement and compromise. And one thing I've been able to remind my freshman colleagues is that I come from the district of Henry Clay. Henry Clay, of course, was known as the Great Compromiser. And what I've said is, we can learn a lot from the message of Henry Clay. My friend Brett Guthrie likes to point out that Henry Clay actually represented the 2nd congressional district, but it was in Lexington in central Kentucky where Henry Clay was from. And Henry Clay does have a lot to teach us. It doesn't mean we have to compromise our core principles, but for the sake of the country, we can compromise on our policy preferences to come together to move the country forward. The American people are desperate for that. We can't afford to not do that, and I'm committed to it. And just a couple weeks ago, a group of 31 freshman members of Congress, bipartisan, came together to express our bipartisan commitment to the need to address our spending crisis in Washington. And we sent a letter to that effect to Leader Pelosi and Speaker Boehner, and we sent a copy to President Obama. I believe that we can come together on a bipartisan basis to resolve these problems, to advance the interests of agriculture and small business and free enterprise all around this country, but to do what's right for future generations of Americans, to restore the American dream, follow in the footsteps of Henry Clay, put aside partisan and ideological agendas and do what's right for the American people. Bipartisanship is what it's going to take, and I'm committed to doing that, and I'm looking forward to serving you, and if we can ever be of assistance, please don't hesitate to call. It's an honor to be with you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.